So welcome everyone to today's webinar on whole school social and emotional learning. I'm Stacy Hsu. I'm the Senior Director for Professional Learning here at Michigan Virtual. Before we get started, just a few things around sketches. So just a reminder that in order to receive Michigan sketches, you will need to be in attendance the entire time on the webinar, and you must be individually logged in. So that means that you can't be watching with someone else. You have to be logged in. That's how we track your attendance. Also, please allow 10 business days for sketch processing. And for those of you joining from your phone, I will be adding a link in the chat to ensure that you receive your sketches, and you'll just need to fill out some information for us, just to ensure that we do have you tracked via your phone. And finally, I want to tell you a little bit about Michigan Virtual. So we are a nonprofit organization with the mission of advancing both learning and teaching through research practice and partnerships. We are proud to offer this professional learning opportunity in partnership with Mindful Practices and its co-founder, Carla Tantillo Philibert. Carla, it's so good to see you again.
It's so great to see you, Stacy, and I am really excited for today because today is the session where it all comes together. And we were talking before we went live with you all. There's so much content to cover and so much to dive into, and this is the session of all of the three where we really want to hear your voices. Stacy is going to be in that chat and she's going to be reading your comments live. So that way we know, like, hey, what are you all thinking? Where do you need help? How can Michigan Virtual lend a hand? How can Mindful Practices lend a hand? So this is this moment where we synthesize all the work that we've done to think critically about the fall. And I just want to say what an honor I'm so honored to be here. What an honor it is for me because I'm such a huge fan of the work that Michigan Virtual does. I mean, you all were innovating before any of us were even thinking about it. And so I am really honored to be here at the table with you and to be with so many educators from across the country. I mean, Stacy, after each session, I'm getting emails from folks, Michigan, Montana, Wisconsin. It's really neat. You have such a wonderful community here.
Well, we feel very fortunate to have you join us and to share the knowledge that you have around social and emotional learning. And just so everyone knows that if you were unable to make the first two webinars, no worries. You can still access those webinars by going to michiganvirtual.org/SEL-webinar. So with that, I'm going to stop talking and give Carla the floor. Carla, take it away.
Thank you, my friend. So here we go. So in case you missed the first two sessions, again, my name is Carla Tantillo. I'm the founder of Mindful Practices. I started Mindful Practices in 2006 after I was both an educator and a curriculum director. So I've been in both seats. I've been in the admin seat. We're going to talk about that at length today, and I've also been an educator. I'm going to be wearing those hats and talking to you all quite frankly and soberly around like, what does an administrator need to do and message for the fall? And what does an educator need to do and message for the fall? Where do we all need to lean in? I'm the author of multiple books on social emotional learning. And my point of pride with these books is that they're field tested, teacher approved. They're not just activities, I dreamt up in my basement. They're activities that I wrote and co-wrote with educators across the country and then field tested and refined. In fact, the Everyday SEL series is in its second edition now, and I'm really excited and proud of that. I'm also the co-founder of the EdTech platform Class Catalyst. After both the first and second sessions, I got many questions around ethical EdTech with intention. And so we're going to talk about that today, about how do you parse through all of the EdTech resources that are out there? How do you know what's EdTech for good and EdTech for evil, right? And so we're going to talk about that. I'm also the co-founder of 5 to Thrive, which is a parent-facing tool. Because one of the silver linings, if you will, from the pandemic is we have access to parents as educators in a way that we never did before. Before, if we wanted to connect with parents, sometimes we'd have to set up, a parent-teacher conference, or they'd have to come to the office, which may or may not be an equitable practice, depending on parents and caregivers' work schedules. Now we can set up a Zoom meeting with parents. And with that, we also can connect parents to their own kids using technology, because we know that a lot of parents want to be there for their students. They want to help address their students' mental health needs. But as we talked about last week, they may or may not have the training. So we're going to talk about that today. And so what are we doing, right? Today, we're going to practice our pop check, which we always do. You'll notice here that experiential nature of our work together. I'm asking you to implement something with your students. I'm asking you to bring something in your schools, but I'm having you test it out first, experience it first as a practitioner. We're going to review our boilerplate agreements, both from the first section and the second. And then we're going to seize this moment, friends. There is this moment for change that we're sitting in right now, and we're going to seize that. And we're going to talk about kind of the ideological nature of that, what we need to let go of as far as what we viewed our job description to be, or maybe it was, and what we can embrace and look forward to in the fall, and then help and support. You're going to see me multiple times say, if you have a question, email this person. If you want more information, here's an article you can read. Because the last thing I want is for you to feel like this webinar series was a one and done. Like, oh, great ideas, but now I've tried to implement and yikes, some things are trickier than I thought. I want you to have thought partners that you can connect with to keep this journey going. And as always, hooray for giveaways. So my friends, Stacy and Ann, are both here, and they are going to be, again, in the chat. I'm going to send you some questions, some prompts. They're going to be reading your responses in real time, and every response that they read out loud, friends, you get a little Starbucks treat. Why? Because your voices matter. Your voices inform this work. And your voices are more important than mine, because you're boots on the ground practitioners every day. We want to hear from you. We want to know what is going to make or break this work, what is going to shape this work. So please, please get those fingers ready in the chat, because we all want to hear from you today. And so we're going to start with our pop check as always. We're going to push, 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 push our chairs back. We're going to find our feet. And we're going to roll our shoulders back. So notice here what you need. Is it a roll your shoulders back? Is it a roll your shoulders forward? Is it a twist? Maybe it's standing up. Maybe you've been seated all day today. And so again, notice what you need. Notice what you need. And then busy hands that like to kind of, fiddle with a phone. I'm going to ask that you take that phone, you take things that are distractions that keep us from being present in the moment, and you kind of tuck those things from the side. You're going to take busy hands, you're going to put them in your lap or on the desk or table in front of you. Always engaging in culturally responsive and trauma-informed practices here, focusing the gaze or lowering the gaze and closing the eyes. Noticing if you feel comfortable with eyes closed. If you don't, leave them open. You do you today. Finding the breath, releasing the tongue from the roof of the mouth, releasing the throat, releasing the jaw. So that's our pause. That's the P in the pop check. And then we're going to own it. What do you need today? Give your thoughts, feelings, what emotions, physical sensations you're experiencing in the body. Put some words to them. Breathe in and breathe out. Now, as you've heard me say before, try to do this from an observational place, not a judgmental place, not an evaluative place. No tisk, 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 no shame on me for feeling a certain way. Just notice. By doing this, we cultivate the bedrock social emotional learning competency of self-awareness, whether we're talking about adult SEC or student development of social emotional learning skills. Self-awareness is the baseline bedrock competency to that. We can't regulate behavior we're not aware of. And so notice where you are. Then we're going to practice a 4 or 5 breath together. It will be our third time through. And so if you feel like you'd like to go on your own, friends, again, you do you. If not, we'll practice it twice together when you're ready. Inhaling 1, 2, 3, 4. Pausing. Exhaling 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And again, inhaling 1, 2, 3, 4, pausing. And exhaling 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Beautiful. Well done. Now, before we dive into our session today, take a moment just to be. How do you feel now after the end of our brief, but still relaxing, I hope, practice? Do you feel more centered? Do you feel more present? And then notice if there's any questions, any burning questions you have for me that you'd like to put in the chat, or anything you want to make sure you exit this session with. Getting emails ready, making sure that you ask for and get the support you need as we dive into this content and you begin to implement back at home. All right, opening the eyes when you're ready, grabbing journals, grabbing paper. Again, adding to your notes, if you haven't already, the pop check practice. So we use this for students, we use it for adults. By adults or educators, I mean all caring adults in a school building who teach students how to be in the world. So you've heard me say it before, I'll say it again. When I think about adult SEL, I'm thinking about, of course, certified and non-certified staff, classified and non-classified staff, making sure that everyone has a seat around the table. And so let's review some boilerplate agreements, friends. Equity is invaluable in social emotional learning work, and equity needs to be taught and experienced and trained up separately. And so should your social emotional learning work in your districts include equity and anti-racist practices 100%, but equity needs its own seat at the table, its own dedicated time, as well as well-being work. Training in SEL is a discipline, not in a curriculum. All means all. So when we talk about training up folks, we talk about all adults, every corner of the school building, all students, every corner of the school building. Progress monitoring over mastery. We're looking at building student and adult social emotional learning skills over time, cultivating that awareness of self so adults and students can regulate. We're not looking at mastery because mastery is often contextualized. And if we look at this work through the lens of mastery, often we find that that lens is inequitable. And so let's put that mastery conversation over here and instead focus on progress monitoring. As we do, we want voice and agency of students and adults to inform the work. We want to think about positive youth identity formation. That's got to be critical. Castle has told us that. We have seen that in the research and the data. Let's make that our North Star. And then thinking about where does this work fit in? We're going to talk about this more at length today when we talk about whole school implementation, the non-instructional piece especially. What is built into the climate and culture of your school? How do we operationalize this work? And then in the instructional side as well. Now, this is the content from the first and second session. And I realize some of you, if you're new today, might be like, oh, wow, that's a lot. I have a question here. I've given you my email address at the bottom of the page. Please feel free to cut and paste, jot down one of those bullets, throw it in an email to me and ask for further information. And I got you, friends. And so again, social emotional learning, we're thinking about that balance between the intrapersonal, what's going on with me that I'm aware of, or maybe not aware of, and then the interpersonal. How am I interacting with others in the room? How does what's going on with me impact those interactions with others in the room? And then their interactions with others. What's my role in that? And so thinking about finding the balance here, again, that balance comes with awareness. And so we hope that through continual practice, developing of awareness, multiple contexts, that then we're able to find the balance between the needs of the self and the needs of the social, right? With the needs of the self without excessive self-sacrifice. Saying my needs aren't important because the needs of the group are louder or more present. We don't want that. And then also looking at social harmony, but social harmony can't come at the expense of equity. Can't come at the expense of saying, oh, well, to make everyone happy, we won't do this anti-racist work. No. And so balancing, again, self-efficacy and social harmony, that balance, finding it through work in the intrapersonal and the interpersonal. And so we're going to start with a case study today, friends, a case study. And so pens in hand, Here we go. I'm going to ask you to write down 3 sentences. Now, this is not, we're not practicing future back here. We're not in ideal world land yet. I'm going to throw the case study at you, and then I want you to tell me, boom, 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 3 sentences, what would happen in your building today. Not what you hope would happen, but what would happen in your building today. So you walk into your classroom. There is a student with a hoodie up. Maybe you walk into your office if you're not in the classroom, right? Maybe you're a school clerk or a security guard and you see a student walking in. So of course, make this situation your own because you are an important member of your school community. That student has a head on their desk, or maybe you see them, they have a head on one of the office chairs. You know that student was absent 3 days last week. You know that student, their father is still out of work from pandemic layoffs, and you know that their grandmother died of COVID in 2020. Now, based on the landscape and the climate culture of your building as it stands today, what would you be driven to do? Whether explicitly stated to you or kind of just like the feel of what everybody else does. You have 60 seconds, friends. Here we go. Now, Stacy or Ann, I'd love for one of you to hop on with me, because as our friends are writing, this is a toughie. This is a toughie. And so, Stacy, what do you think some of our friends who are on the call with us today, what do you think might be going through their minds right now? Do you think this is a scenario that may feel familiar, may not feel familiar? What do you think, Stace?
I think this is definitely a case study that feels familiar as someone who formerly taught 6th grade. I know in my classroom, I can picture the student in my mind, and how do you connect with them? How do you make sure they're okay? And also having a 5th grader, a little of this resonates with me too from home. So I'm really excited to see what everybody puts in the chat.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so, friends, there's our invitation. Okay, Starbucks cards are coming. Please enter your thoughts into the chat. And so again, let's dig a little bit deep here. When you write down, like, this is what I would do, or this is what I'd be called to do, is it because it's been explicitly said to you? Like, okay, Stacy is a 6th grade teacher. If their student has their hoodie up, this is what you do. Are there systems and structures in place? Or are those systems and structures absent? Now, we talked about this a little last week and we're diving into it today. Social emotional learning in the past was seen in so many cases, and sadly, as crisis intervention. It was not seen as a tier 1 universal support. It was seen as something for these problem students. And so with the pandemic and schools shutting down, we lost a lot of kids, meaning they fell through the cracks. Meaning that system of crisis intervention, like we catch the ones we can see that visibly are distressed, that's broken because those students weren't in front of us. And so has your school reinvented itself with these responses? Or are we still operating with the old system, even though the old system doesn't work anymore? And so, Stacy, is anything coming through in the chat just yet?
Yes. So
okay.
It looks like Angela would definitely check in with the student and build a relationship between myself and the student. Jada stated that she's new or is new to the building. So I'm not sure what the climate would say, but for me, I'd leave a sticky note on the desk of the student asking if there is something I can do to help. I'd have a conversation with the student privately about what might be going on, and I'd reach out to the school counseling department to do a check-in on them as well. I'd probably reach out to parents, and if I didn't get much from the student themselves to check in and see if something is going on with them at home, I should know about it.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you so much. Now the question, friends, when we think about those 2 very insightful responses that came into the chat, as well as what you all wrote down, were you explicitly told how to respond or not? And the reason that this answer matters is because have we at your school buildings operationalized student mental health? How we function, what we do? Are there procedures and protocols in place? Or are some of you just go get them educators and go get them administrators who kind of figured this out on your own? Like, love the post-it idea. Is every teacher in your school doing the post-it idea? I hope so. And so noticing what you've done just because you have those teacher guts and those educator sense that like this, I love kids and this is what I'm going to do. Or is this something that is part of the climate and culture of how your buildings operate? Now, what we need to have in the fall is we need to have this operationalized. And we'll talk about why, and we'll dive into mandated reporter and all that piece. But thinking about what your answer was and where that answer came from to start. And so this is a piece that we have created as a PDF, and Stacy's going to send it all to you. She's also going to put it in the chat. And I strongly, strongly recommend that when you exit here, that this is one of those things that you share with folks in your buildings, right? Whether it's formally in a professional development session or a PLC, or informally, like, hey, this is good food for thought. But let's start here at the top. Why SEL? Why SEL? What do we want out of this? We want to honor students' social emotional learning needs because optimal conditions for learning will be achieved. And also because we realize now more than ever that that's part of our job. So what's the problem? Why don't we do this? We all believe we should. There's not enough time, like we've talked about in the past. And so with these little information flows, I know we've seen this before. What happens? Are we all the way to the left, friends? We wait until a crisis and then we convene a suicide or gun violence task force. If that is where your school is living, then follow your little information flow down. Do you ask the teachers to tell you what they think the kids are thinking and feeling? Or do you ask your students directly? Now you'll notice that little ask your students directly has a nice blue bold line that's going all the way down the page. We'll see that in a second. But notice if you answered those two boxes to the left, where does that leave us? That leaves us blindly making choices about the needs and well-being of students. Blindly making choices. Adults trying to guess what's going on in students' heads. Well-intentioned, loving, caring adults. Adults who this is their favorite part of the job, being there for kids. Yet still, they don't have the time or the resources to do this part of their job right. So now let's take a peek. We see that little bold arrow coming down, and what does it say? It says, yes, you listen to kids, great. Now ask the question, do our teachers know what practices they need to meet students' needs? And this is where we think about basketball. So we've got basketball in the brain. I know if you're like me, many of us, right, today and this week. We need the person on the basketball court who can make the awesome three-point shot. But if that person hogs the ball the entire game, what's going to happen? We need that person to say, hey, I need a minute. I need to sit on the bench a minute. We need that person to pass the ball. We need other people to make those three-point shots too. And so what often happens is even when we do create opportunities to listen to students, we just immediately throw the ball to the social worker or throw the ball to the counselor because there hasn't been an explicit game plan that's been set out for us. So maybe we use the really, really good Post-it note idea. And then maybe that student jumps back at us with something that's super heavy. And we're like, okay, I'm glad I asked, but I also don't feel equipped to handle the situation. Now, what do? I know the social worker is totally burdened. That's not your fault. And that's not the social worker's fault. That's the fault of a system that only saw mental health needs and SEL needs as crisis intervention. So nothing's been operationalized to have that work any other way. There's no longitudinal data. There's no game plan other than social worker. Throw the social worker the ball. They can make the three-pointer. Social workers are amazing. They can make the three-pointer, but there's one of them and they're tired. They've been in the game for the past 6 years. And so thinking about how we can operationalize this differently. Now, you'll notice here where we end, and it's no surprise to you all, right? That we want every child to be connected with a caring adult. No student falls through the cracks, social, emotionally, or academically. Now, this is another reason why we say we're going to train up every caring adult in the building. Because if we're going to say, social worker, we're not just going to throw you the ball to do the three-pointer, then the teachers are going to say, okay, then that means that I'm doing all the three-point shots now. No, it means we're going to look at who's sitting on the bench. We've got awesome folks on the bench, paraprofessionals, security guards, teachers' aides, clerks, specials teachers. We have awesome folks on the bench that are like, hey, I also have great relationships with students. Somebody ask me, somebody throw me the ball. And so what we do is we stop thinking about this SEL work as only belonging to this person or that person, this person's job or that person's job. We train up all caring adults, and then we shift up the way that we operationalize SEL. If we didn't have an answer to that first question that we journaled on, if we didn't know if it was explicit like we've been told, or like, oh, or we just learned it in grad school, we need that answer. And we all need to answer in our buildings the exact same way, no matter what jersey we're wearing, no matter what hat we wear in our schools, because it has been told to us explicitly, if you work at this school, this is how we expect you to show up in the SEL work. This is how we're going to evaluate you on this SEL work. This is your job. Now, you might not be shooting all the 3-pointers, but you might be the one who slam dunk. You're the slam dunk person. You're the Jordan. Cool. Although Jordan can also do 3-pointers. I mean, Chicago Bulls, right? I know. Spoken like a true Chicagoan, but you get my drift, friends. And so what we have to do is take something that kind of worked, although it was always just a pants on fire situation, press pause and say, this is our moment to reinvent. This is our moment to change things up. This is our moment to ruffle feathers. People are going to be like, oh, no. The old system was the way. Yeah, the old system was broken. So we're going to have a tough conversation. I need you to be in this reality with me. The old system was broken. Students were falling through the cracks. Now we're going to change it up and we're going to operationalize it. We're going to make it explicit. We're going to say, this is what we do and this is how we do it. Now, when we do that, we have to talk about data, right? Like why? Why are we going to change? When we think about maltreatment, and this gets us back to this conversation or entering into this conversation about mandated reporter. And this was a slide that we use. Again, our trauma therapist found it. You'll notice here, this data is from 2011, of course, because these studies only happen, right? Once every 5 years, once every 10. When we think of how disproportional this is, we think about students of color, people of color. This is why, again, we start with the anti-racist work. We start with the equity work. So we can have critical conversations with school stakeholders. We leave comfort zones for some of us. Maybe it's a little bit awkward. Maybe there's some light that needs to be shed, but we say, hey, there is a moral imperative here. Let's dig in. Let's talk about it. We also think about this COVID moment that we're in. Looking at this recent data from the CEC, adults reported considerably elevated adverse mental health conditions. Something that we think about is that our students who may or may not have had lines of sight into this in the past have now, because so many of them were learning from home, have now because parents were working from home and maybe they'd go into work. And so maybe parents would only see their kids for like 90 minutes a day, 2 hours a day, only on the weekends. And so also remembering that that's adults within schoolhouse doors as well. And so when we think about, hey, how do we unlock this? What's the answer? We go back to our friend, John Hattie. Oh gosh, who doesn't love John Hattie? John Hattie told us this. He wrote a book. What was it? 6 years ago. He told us this. We're all like, okay, that's awesome. Meta-analysis, cool. Then he wrote another book, basically saying the same stuff, but louder. And we're like, okay, thank you, John Hattie. We hear you. Okay. Now is our moment to be like, okay, John Hattie, we're changing things up in our buildings. We are going to create more space to build positive relationships. Students to teachers, to adults, to educators, to administrators. As you heard me say last week, students, I don't have to be their person, but they need a person. And if I'm saying I don't have to be their person and the social worker doesn't have to be their person, but they need a person, then that means I need to give all of these people training and operationalize what it means to be a student's person, what it means to listen. And then when are the things that I escalate? How do we define that? So there's no gray, there's no murky, there's no muddy. And so the first step is making the time. Now you've got pens in hands and journals in front of you. I'm going to ask you right now, thinking about your current schedule, and I'm going to give you 30 quick seconds to jot down where you can find 3 minutes. Go. Where do you have an extra 3 minutes? Where do you have an extra 3? Ten seconds. Beautiful. Pens down. Now, you might not have an extra 3. When we think about unfinished learning, we think about learning loss. You might be like, really, lady, an extra 3 minutes? Are you kidding? I feel you, friends. So that means we go to our administrators. Yep, administrators. Administrators, we're going to have a lot of heart-to-heart convos today during the session. Administrators, this is when you give people time. If this is priority, you got to give people time. It's not going to happen any other way. And you have to defend it. You have to defend it so then they don't get calls from parents. Why are you doing all this? No. You got to defend it to the school board. You got to defend it. This is where administrators, and I know you've been taking a lot for the team. Keep going with our basketball metaphor here. But this is where we need you to lean into saying, this work takes time. Not just time on training everybody up, but to cultivate positive relationships. It takes time. Meaningful, positive relationships where people feel seen and witnessed and heard. The things that make kids want to come to school. That takes time. It's not the same point of entry for all kids. The kid that gets all the accolades, it's easy to say, oh, hey, heard you won the spelling bee again, right? As we pass him in the hallway. The child with the hoodie up, it might be a different point of entry. It might take a little longer time. The kid with the higher ACEs score, it might be a different point of entry. It might take a longer time. It doesn't mean we give up. It means we're set aside the time to make it happen. So we get back to this place around like, if our North Star here, friends, is every child is connected with a caring adult. No student falls through the cracks. All means all. There's a principal I work with, Jeremy Patterson Jackson. Many of you probably know him. And that's what he said to me. It's the first day we met, when I've worked with his school, he's like, Carla, all means all. Every kid, all means all. No student is missing. No student falls through the cracks. This guy lives and breathes this as an administrator. That's his North Star. He's made tough choices around it. But having that North Star is vital, especially as we look ahead to the fall. So we talked about this last time. Like, when do we practice this non-instructional piece? Is it 30 seconds? If we're middle school, high school, is it 3 minutes? When's the frequency? It's daily. What's the method? Is it a pop check? Is it class catalyst or different opportunities for EdTech? We need to think about, before formal instruction begins, and we're saying, oh, the journey of the protagonist in this story is just like yours when we think about bullying. Okay, sure, that's great. But what is this child's story? Not so they're defined by it, not so we lower expectations for them, but so we can meet them where they are. They feel seen, they feel heard. Their story matters because it informs SEL work. It doesn't matter because, oh, well, they had a rough time, now they don't have to turn in the quiz. Maybe they turn in the quiz tomorrow. But we don't say, I can't hear this student's story because I don't have the emotional bandwidth for it. I can't hear this student's story because I don't have the training for it. These are the things that we solve for. And this is this golden opportunity, friends, for us to look at everything we're doing wrong. And as Maya Angelou said, right? Know better, do better. So I'm going to share a little bit of the data from Class Catalyst and what has driven our work. So Class Catalyst is a tool we developed arm in arm with our research partner at University of Chicago Chapin Hall. One of the reasons we developed this tool is because by working with school districts across the country, we found a couple things. Invariably, it was going to be inequitable because some school districts can't afford to hire my team to come out and work arm in arm to train their teachers. And that's awesome. But then you have school districts, sometimes they're smaller, sometimes they're rural, where they can't afford that. They can't afford the plane ticket to rural Oklahoma. And so we had to get a tool in the hands of educators to solve for their bandwidth, right? They cared. Oh my gosh, they cared so much. How could we solve for their bandwidth? They wanted to connect with every student every day. But logistically, they didn't feel that they had that skill set. And then also, how did they work the room where they could connect physically with 28 bodies at the same time at the start of the school day? It wasn't possible. And so this is when we think about EdTech for good versus evil. This is where EdTech can solve for a logistical problem. That's when we use EdTech, because a teacher can't go around every desk and be like, are you okay? Here's a post-it note. Are you okay? Are you okay? Are you okay? And get authentic answers and build relationships with students. And so what EdTech can solve for is creating a platform where each student can check in 3 minutes a day and organize that check-in information. So teachers like, okay, these 6 students are coded red. These are the 6 I need to connect with. And these students are coded yellow based on their self-report. And this also gave students an opportunity to like write in that little box that you see on the screen and be like, hey, this is what's happening with me today. Everything from like, I got a new puppy or a baby sister to my grandmother passed away. So the teacher can make real-time instructional choices to meet students where they are without lowering expectations, but operating from a place of compassion and empathy. And so we started this 3 years ago. We had a beta. Then we moved from beta into a small pilot across 8 states. We worked with a very diverse cohort of schools because we wanted this to be a research-based, evidence-informed tool. And we're going to talk about that. And so we also looked at practical strategies that we had given teachers for my book, like making the pop checks, making bulletin boards, and was the combination of the real-time check-in versus EdTech, and then using hands-on tools that were screens free. How did that combination translate into numbers, translate into real change? And so this is what we found. Now, this data is from 2018. And so this is the data that we started to collect. And again, we have reams and reams and oodles with of course, Chapin as a research partner guiding this work. What do we change? What do we alter? Now, if we think about students ready to learn, right? We all say ready to learn, but what does it mean? And so part of the exercise for us was like, when we say social emotional learning, help students be ready to learn, what are we really talking about? We interviewed a lot of teachers. We interviewed a lot of administrators and asked them that question. What does it mean for your students to be ready to learn? Unpack this a little bit. What are your look-fors? And basically, it's a mood. Are they sad? Are they grumpy? Are they not like, I'm not doing this today? Mixed with energy. Are they exhausted? Did they sleep well? Did they eat breakfast? And that combination of mood and energy, as Kane and Kane say, like a relaxed alertness, that creates optimal conditions for learning, the optimal learning environment. And we found through a mix of kind of like your hands-on bulletin board tools, as well as strategic EdTech supports that don't bleed too much time, we were able to increase optimal learning by 23% over just 5 months. Now, why am I showing you this data today? Because I'm asking you to change things, friends. I'm asking you to go back to your school buildings and say, we got to make some changes. And no one likes to hear that, especially after 18 months of change. But if you can increase your student engagement by 23%, is it worth it? Is it worth it? The answer, of course, is yes. Now, is it worth it just because of unfinished learning and learning loss? Okay, right. But is it worth it? Yeah. Is it worth it for students to know that they have a place to express their emotions? And then they also have agency to act, like, oh, I'm angry, I need to practice. This is what I need. I'm sad and tired. I need this. That's what we talked about in the first session, that lifelong learning game. Because that's what we all want. If we bump into a student in Walmart in 10 years, what do we want to know? We want to know that that student is like a compassionate, caring citizen of the world, that they have agency, that they have voice, they have a can-do attitude. That's what we care about. Do we care that they remember the Pythagorean theorem? Shoot, I don't remember the Pythagorean theorem, right? Sorry, math teachers. Love you, but yeah, I don't. I should, but I don't. And so being real about our content, being real about our work, all content matters, but what's the end goal for all of us? Lifelong learning. How do we get there? The same way we remember our multiplication tables, right? Automaticity. And automaticity takes practice, and practice takes time out of the school day. And so now this is one of those things where we are going to turn on the chat again, and we are going to ask you to really plug in. Now I'm going to ask you to read this piece through the leadership lens, talking about what are our next steps. Now, this is written for those of you that are thought leaders, administrators, you're on SELT teams, you're the teacher that's really into SEL and you're bringing us back to your building. And we're saying here, this is what you got to do. You got to get explicit with the messaging. You've got to nail it. If people don't know what's expected of them, they don't know if they're going to get evaluated on it, they don't know if it's part of their job description, it's a fail. All of those questions have to be answered. And this is tough, especially for something we always kind of got used to being ambiguous before. And so I'm going to put on 90 seconds of music, friends. We're going to play a little music. You're going to write. Now you can write it right into the chat if you want. Press send when you're ready. Or you want to journal a little bit and then add it to the chat. You do you. We're going to play 90 seconds of music, and then my friend Stacy will come on and we'll hear from some folks. Here we go. Friends, 30 seconds. So Miss Stacy, as you're coming on, my friend, we got a really great question from Miss Andrea. So Andrea, I'm going to answer your question real quick as Stacy's coming on and shares some thoughts from the chat. And Andrea, definitely a Starbucks gift card for this one, my friend. This is such an insightful question. What about asynchronous versus synchronous systems? And so synchronous is, of course, students are checking in real time with the teacher, which is valuable information. And then what about asynchronous systems, where students check in, maybe not live with a teacher, but at separate points throughout the day? Great question. Now, Class Catalyst is set up, and I can speak from my experience with that tech tool, to be both synchronous and asynchronous. The one piece that the school using it has to nail, and we help you with that recommendation, is what you are messaging to your educators. Are educators responsible for checking the tool, checking into Class Catalyst after school hours, on the weekends? And so if they are not, then that is messaged to the school community, to the students. So if the students do check in with Class Catalyst over the weekend, they know that no teacher will see it until Monday morning. Now, that is the preferable model, only because mentally and physically and emotionally, we cannot ask our teachers to be on 24 hours a day. And so I love your thought about asynchronous, Andrea. And when we think about asynchronous, what I recommend to our clients and our school partners is that you define it as anytime during school hours, but it doesn't have to be when you're sitting right in front of that teacher. So beautiful question. Thank you, my friend. So Miss Stacy, what do we have? What came into the chat? This is a bunch here in this reading, and some of this stuff lands really well, and some of the stuff people are like, oh, no. So what's going on in the chat, my friend?
Oh my goodness, there are so many great thoughts in the chat. So let's start with Amber. And Amber's from Michigan. And the first step is to get everyone together and find their strengths and weaknesses when it comes to student engagement. Make a conscious space and time for connections and letting go of academic at times because they need more than that.
Love. Thank you, Amber.
From Melissa, my next step is to talk with all the teachers, teacher assistants, center assistants, and bus staff to ensure that they understand the importance of making the SEL connection with all children who are in our program. They are important and will provide CASEL training for our mental health specialists in our program for Head Start.
Beautiful. Love it, love it, love it.
And then Zarnia, at my school in particular, the first step should be getting everyone on board. Classroom teachers are treated differently from other teaching and not teaching staff, and at times specialist teachers, parapros, and aides are left behind, deciding for themselves. So getting together as a team and get SEL training as a group and practice SEL in an adult group, play out scenarios.
I love it. Thank you, friends. What awesome insight. And so you'll notice here in this excerpt, and this is actually an excerpt from the second edition of my book, I give some real explicit language that I want folks to use. Real explicit language. Now, often I will see well-intentioned school leaders who will say, oh, what I'm going to do is I'm going to convene a committee, and that committee will meet, and they will put together an 18-page Google Doc. No, because it lives in Google Doc land. It lives in committee land, and ultimately administrators, what people need is for you to make decisions. Should you listen to people? 110%. But do you need to make a decision and move this forward? Absolutely. And so what we're going to talk about next here is what is a timeline? And so again, we work with about 75 school districts across the United States and Latin America. And this is the timeline that we are recommending to folks for the fall. Is it perfect? No. Is it a perfect scenario moving into the fall? No. So what we have to do is balance listening with action. What I see is schools erring usually on one side or the other. We spend so much time listening that folks feel heard, but we haven't really changed anything. Or we jump right into action and we're leaving out critical voices that deserve a seat in the table. And this is where often marginalized groups that have been historically marginalized are still marginalized. Like, oh, our school is a safe place. Unless you're a paraprofessional, you're not allowed in the teacher's lounge. Okay, then your school isn't a safe place. And so what we have to do is make sure that we're listening to all voices. And so this is my recommendation. August to September, we hear all voices. And by all, we think critically about what that means, what that's meant historically in our school district, who has not had a seat in the table. We invite folks to have a seat at the table. We listen to hardships and we celebrate victories. Now, this is where this is difficult, is that we want to hear hardships and we want to hear victories. But those people who share hardships and we give them the mic and we say, share, 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 might not also be the same people that are leading us when we go into the get up and move October to December piece. And that is difficult because often if these stakeholders have not yet had the mic or not yet had an opportunity to speak, and you give them the mic and then you say, oh, but wait a second, I'm taking it away in October, that's hard. And that doesn't feel right or good or just. And so my recommendation is that whatever process you come up with, you are fully transparent about the timeline. You're fully transparent about the horizon. These are the pieces. And then you create space in May or July, you'll see it here, to listen again. So those stakeholders that were heard potentially for the first time in your district know that their voices mattered and know that they will have a chance to speak again. And that's critical because what you don't want to do is take the mic away from folks and then say, oh, thanks for sharing your hard story. Now we're going to go move into action over here. No. And so really being culturally responsive in your approach to this work and intentional, this is critical. So we hear all voices, we listen to hardships, we celebrate victories, we create that space. Then we synthesize this information. So it's not enough to give people a platform to be heard. What are you going to do with it? How is this analysis happening? And is the platform for folks to be heard multifaceted? So maybe it is at the town hall or the board meeting where people can speak verbally. Maybe it is where they can send something in some type of anonymous form to you, a handwritten note. Maybe it is in different multifaceted ways. because the same parent that's going to be comfortable, the same stakeholder that's going to be comfortable speaking at the board meeting may or may not be comfortable writing you a letter, or vice versa. And so understanding the different points of entry here, and then saying out loud to everyone, this is how we're analyzing all this great input you're giving us. You're not being heard just to be heard. We're actually doing something with it. And this is where you've got to think strategically, who's the next folks on the team, right? That are coming out. Okay. It's halftime. Now who's coming out on the court? This is where we synthesize. This is where we analyze. This is where we operationalize this piece. And then when we look at the end of the year in May and July and we say, did this work? What are the proof points we're going to need? We decide those ahead of time. Is it attendance went up? Okay, great. Think of those performance metrics we shared last week from CPS. Attendance went up. Maybe student reporting on a school survey, like 5 essentials that we use here in Illinois. Great. But decide those proof points. Is it a checklist that all teachers are using? Great. Whatever it may be, decide it ahead of time versus retroactively. So that way you can analyze with intention, synthesize with intention, and move forward with intention. Then January to April, we implement, we integrate, we collect that data and proof points. And by collecting the data and proof points, and notice I'm saying proof points here because not everybody has the bandwidth or resources for the formal randomized controlled trial that we're doing with University of Chicago. So have teachers create checklists. That works too. Because what we want is to be able to have proof points to guide this last piece, which is reflect, listen again, open up the doors, invite stakeholders, students, certified, non-certified, classified, non-classified, everyone around the table. And when you can, pay people. Please pay people when you can. And I know it's tough, but you've heard me say, if we have this gift of ESSER funds, can you pay people to come around the table and share their voices and share their words? And if you're including students, please pay them when you can. If they're 13 and up, it makes it a little bit easier, but really thinking about compensating students for their time, which that compensation does show respect, and saying you have a seat at the table and being as equitable as we can about that, even for students. And so thinking here as we close in this last 10 minutes that SEL, sure, it's not simple and we know that. It needs to be co-created. It's not the curriculum that we buy. We know that. It's something that we co-create. And how do we co-create it? Well, we create it like a timeline like this, right? Really being strategically. Now, being strategic, can we do it all? Nope, we can't. Is it going to be perfect? Nope, it's not. But it's better than doing nothing. It's better than sitting there and seeing the student with the hoodie up and saying, I don't have the time, energy, or resources to support that child. So I'm just going to pretend like I don't see them. That didn't work before. It's not going to work now. Now is the time to change that. And so one of the reasons that it's been really difficult to move the needle when we think about student voice and agency is because, again, adults are not sure of the playing field. They're not sure what's been explicitly said to them, what's been implicitly said to them. What about mandated reporter? When do I need to kind of cover my butt and when do I not? And so if I don't talk to the student with the hoodie up, then I'm not going to have to be a mandated reporter and call DCFA, right? Again, there needs to be clarity around this. And so in his work with us and in his work with Chapin Hall and multiple states around even the foster care system, my research partner, Dr. Kim, noticed that one of the obstacles for hearing student voice and connecting with kids, building those positive relationships, was that murkiness around mandated reporter. Schools couldn't answer what was neglect and what was abuse. And so right now, when you're with us, friends, when you're thinking about how am I going to change the SEL game in my school in this fall, you got to answer this question. What is abuse and what is neglect? So if a student comes in and tells you in their check-in, whether it's the check-in in Class Catalyst, whether it's your pop check, whether it's a thumb check as they walk in the door, and you find out that they're hungry for the 4th day in a row, do you call your state agency about it? Is it abuse or is it neglect? Now, the kind of status quo was to just call for everything because there was so much litigation. But by calling for everything, both abuse and neglect, what has happened is that those hotlines are crowded And then state agencies aren't able to give students the support that they need when they're in crisis. And then also we have adults who are like, I know if I find out something, I'd have to call. So I'm going to leave the student with the hoodie alone. What we need to do is tackle this question today if we want to think about SEL in the fall. We've got to dig into this. Now here I give you an article co-written by my research partner, COVID-19 and child welfare, looking at trends in maltreatment and response. This is an article that, yes, it's heavy. Yes, it's got that kind of like academic feel to it, but is it a great window into conversation around why we need to clarify this explicit implicit piece? Why we all need to be on the same page around what is abuse, what is neglect, when do we call? So that way we can sigh relief and feel more able to reach out to students like we know we want to. Now, when we think about voice, agency, and positive youth identity, this is especially critical with the positive youth identity piece. Students know that we see them in need, and they know that we don't ask. They know that they're that kid. And so what we have to do is, again, shift the way that we've operationalized SEL, moving it from crisis intervention, which involves a call to the state agency, moving it away from that by being very explicit, training up the team is everyone, saying, you do the 3-pointers, you do the slam dunks, you do this, and really being clear about roles and responsibilities. And if there does need to be a call to the state agency, it's because this or this or this was present. Being very clear, because if we're going to create a space for student voice and agency, we have to also create space and mechanisms to receive what comes in without shaming a child, and then also without shaming adults. Let's remember that adults also have mental health needs. And so how do we treat and create space for those mental health needs? How do we receive them all? We receive them all when we operationalize it, because then people know, oh, when this happens, that happens. I do have bandwidth because I know what to do. Now, this is where we think about EdTech. Where can we use EdTech tools? How can EdTech be something where we're like, okay, phew, there's a way to collect data. Okay, phew, there's a way to hear all student voices. Now, as many of you know, I give talks on just this and work with districts on just this because there's a lot of EdTech resources out there. So I won't go through the whole thing, but one of the pieces I want to make sure that I point out is knowing when EdTech talks about engagement, it means staring at a screen. It doesn't mean engagement in learning. And really being intentional about that. If your students spend 3 seconds completing a math problem and 10 minutes building a candy castle, many folks would call that engagement. I don't. And so what we have to do when we unpack EdTech is look at tools that have done research with organizations, not internal research, but with outside external validators. EdTech tools that are both evidence informed, meaning what's in the field, how did what's in the field inform the creation of this EdTech tool, and also evidence-based, like the RCT that we're doing with Chapin Hall. Like, okay, now this thing is built and it's in schools and it's rocking. How is there an evidence base for this work? And so really being super, super critical, being an informed consumer with EdTech. Don't say, I need SEL. Okay, so I'm just going to buy this thing over here. Because as I say, there's no clearinghouse for EdTech. There's no EdTech FDA where there's somebody in a lab coat like checking boxes, making sure there's no yucky EdTech tools out there. Nope. And so if there's something that you want more information about, I give you here the email address for my director of digital supports. She's on my team where we work with districts around parsing EdTech tools, SEL tools, so you can really make an informed choice. Remembering here that North Star of intrapersonal and interpersonal friends. When we think about choices we're making for the fall, whether it's EdTech, whether it's paper and pencil, can you find that balance? What supports the personal growth, that growth of the self, and what supports that growth of the social? Because for students and adults to be successful, that's where they need to find the balance. I need to be able to take the test that's in front of me and not get in a fight with the kid next to me. I need to be able to teach my class and also get along with my grade level team. So together, friends, we can change the way we do SEL. No knee-jerk curricular buys, find thought partners. And if you need one, I've got one. I'll hook you up with an amazing SELT team or a superintendent in another district. We know SEL is not crisis intervention, so we're going to stop treating it that way. We're going to rethink mandated reporter. We're going to dive into what abuse and neglect mean. We're going to get to know our EdTech. We're going to have a litmus test. Are they saying engagement, and how much of it is building a candy castle? And when we think about what needs to stay and what needs to go, our North Star is voice, agency, and positive identity building. Now, as we close, as we did before, I'm going to invite my friend Stacy back, and I'm also going to give you my email address. Of all the sessions, this one was so much information because we're planning for the fall. We had some critical conversations, some tough conversations, Stace, but I want this group to know that you, the Michigan virtual team, is there to support them in the fall. Me, Vienna, the Mindful Practices team is there to support them in the fall. This isn't a one and done workshop series. We got their backs as they move into this critical, important work.
So again, Carla, this has been an outstanding hour of information that's applicable and so needed. And I would just like to say thank you so much. I would like to say thank you to the audience today. It was wonderful having you all participate. Again, we'll be sending out the link to this webinar in an email to all of you. And Carla, it's been outstanding, and I can't wait to work together again.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be here. And I love the chat. I love the questions we're getting. Thank you all. And know that we are a phone call, we're an email away. So please reach out. I loved hearing from so many friends after the first and second session. Keep them coming. We are here for you. I'll play a little music as we wrap, but again, please feel free to email me now. I'll get back to you within 24 hours. Let's do this, friends. Together, we can make the change. We can do it.
Have a wonderful week, everyone.